Table 46? I asked the young woman at the reception desk, certain she must have made a mistake. She glanced nervously at the seating chart before forcing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Yes, Mrs. Whitmore. Right this way. I followed her across the ballroom of the Grand Windsor Hotel, my silver heels sinking softly into the thick ivory carpet, while a string quartet played near the dance floor. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead like floating stars, reflecting off champagne glasses and polished silverware. It should have been beautiful. It should have felt like one of the happiest nights of my life. After all, my granddaughter Olivia was getting married tonight, and I had paid for nearly every detail in this room. The flowers imported from Vermont. The 5-tier cake covered in hand-piped sugar roses. The custom lighting that made the ballroom glow amber and gold. Even the honeymoon in Tuscany waiting for the newlyweds tomorrow morning. I had written checks for all of it with trembling hands and a full heart because I believed family meant showing up for each other. But as the young hostess guided me farther and farther away from the center of the ballroom, past the family tables near the stage, past the VIP guests, past Olivia's college friends laughing beneath towers of white orchids, something cold began settling in my chest. Then I saw it. Table 46. A tiny round table shoved beside the swinging kitchen doors where waiters rushed in and out carrying trays of dirty dishes and half-empty wine glasses. Every few seconds the doors burst open with the sound of clattering silverware and shouted kitchen orders. The smell of roasted salmon and garlic butter hung heavily in the air. A bus cart squeaked past so closely it nearly brushed my chair. I stared at the little white name card placed carefully beside the plate. Margaret Whitmore. Table 46. For a moment I honestly thought there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe Olivia didn't know. Maybe the wedding planner mixed up the seating chart. But then I looked across the ballroom and saw my daughter-in-law Vanessa seated proudly at table 1 near the dance floor, surrounded by people I barely recognized. A local realtor. 2 women Vanessa played tennis with. Some young couple Olivia once met on a ski trip in Aspen. They were all laughing beneath the soft candlelight while I sat beside the kitchen entrance like an afterthought nobody knew where to place. Vanessa noticed me then. Our eyes met briefly across the ballroom. She smiled politely, lifted her champagne glass toward me in a tiny gesture, and turned away before I could respond. That was the moment I understood this wasn't an accident. My throat tightened, but I refused to let anyone see it. At 68 years old, I had learned there were humiliations too deep for tears. So I simply sat down in my chair while another waiter hurried past carrying a tray of steak plates dripping with sauce. The music swelled. Guests applauded somewhere near the stage. Nobody looked at me. Nobody waved me over. A little while later, the wedding photographer began gathering family members for portraits beneath the floral arch. Immediate family first, he announced cheerfully. I watched as Vanessa adjusted Olivia's veil, Daniel straightened his tuxedo jacket, and everyone crowded together smiling beneath the golden lights. My own son never once turned around to look for me. Not once. The chair beside me remained empty while the kitchen doors kept swinging open and shut behind my back. And sitting there beside the sound of clattering dishes and muffled laughter, I realized something far more painful than being forgotten. I realized I had not been invited to this wedding as family. I had been invited as funding. The first time Olivia called me her favorite person in the world, she was 6 years old and covered in strawberry ice cream. We were sitting on a splintered wooden bench outside a little shop near Cape Cod, while the summer wind tangled her blonde curls into knots. She had leaned against my shoulder with complete trust and whispered those words so softly I almost missed them. "Do not tell Mommy," she said seriously, "but I love you more because you always listen." I remember laughing then. Real laughter. The kind that comes easily before you understand how fragile families can become. Back then, Olivia spent nearly every weekend at my house in Greenwich. She used to run barefoot through my kitchen while I baked blueberry muffins on Sunday mornings. My late husband Walter would sit at the breakfast table pretending to read the newspaper while secretly slipping her extra chocolate chips when he thought I was not looking. Those were the years when our family still felt warm and solid. Before appearances became more important than affection. Before Vanessa entered the picture with her polished smile and careful little comments disguised as compliments. At first, I blamed myself for not noticing the change sooner. Vanessa was beautiful in the effortless Connecticut country club way. Perfect blonde highlights, cream cashmere sweaters draped over her shoulders, tiny diamond earrings that caught the light whenever she tilted her head. She always spoke softly in public, always knew exactly which fork to use at dinner parties, always sent handwritten thank you cards after holidays. Everyone called her elegant. I called her thoughtful. But over the years, small things began disappearing. Family dinners stopped including me because Vanessa claimed Olivia had too much homework. Christmas mornings became private just for the kids. Vacations happened without anyone mentioning them until photographs appeared online afterward. At first, Daniel apologized every time. "You know how busy life gets, Mom." Then eventually he stopped apologizing altogether. Somewhere along the way, I became someone they discussed instead of someone they included. Yet whenever they needed help, my phone rang immediately. Olivia's tuition deposit, Daniel's property taxes one difficult year, the down payment on their first home in Darien. I gave without hesitation because that is what mothers do. That is what grandmothers do. Love becomes instinct after enough years. You stop measuring how much of yourself you are giving away. Last winter, Olivia visited me alone one snowy afternoon while Vanessa was at some charity luncheon in Manhattan. We sat beside the fireplace drinking peppermint tea, while thick snowflakes drifted across the backyard. She showed me photographs of wedding venues on her laptop for nearly 3 hours. Ballrooms with crystal chandeliers. Garden receptions with imported roses. Candlelit terraces overlooking vineyards in Napa Valley. Her eyes sparkled the entire time. "I know it is expensive," she admitted quietly, "but I want people to remember it forever." I reached across the sofa and squeezed her hand. "Then we will make it unforgettable," I told her. And I meant every word. 2 weeks later, I transferred almost $200,000 from my retirement portfolio into a wedding account opened specifically for Olivia. I never once asked for recognition. I never expected praise. But sitting there beside the kitchen doors while strangers occupied the family tables, I finally understood something painful. They had accepted my generosity for years without ever intending to keep a place for me beside them. The realization settled slowly, like cold rain soaking through winter fabric. Quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. Dinner was served a little after 7 o'clock, though by then I had already stopped pretending my table placement had been accidental. The ballroom lights dimmed softly as waiters carried silver trays between the tables, balancing filet mignon, rosemary potatoes, and glasses of red wine that shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Every few minutes the kitchen doors beside me burst open again with the sharp smell of butter and steam. A young waiter apologized twice after bumping the back of my chair. I smiled both times and told him not to worry about it. None of this was his fault. Across the room, Vanessa stood near the sweetheart table adjusting Olivia's veil for photographs while guests circled around them with phones raised high. From a distance they looked like the kind of family people envy. Elegant, successful, perfectly polished. I watched them laugh together while the empty chair beside me remained untouched. Then I noticed something strange. Every framed photograph displayed around the ballroom featured Olivia and Daniel's side of the family almost exclusively. There were childhood pictures, graduation portraits, vacation memories from Martha's Vineyard in Aspen, all carefully arranged on gold easels near the dance floor. But I was barely in any of them. In one photograph, only half my shoulder appeared at the edge of the frame as though someone had intentionally cropped me out. In another, Walter had been included while I was missing entirely despite the fact that I had been standing beside him when the picture was taken. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Weddings are chaotic. Details get overlooked. But then I overheard 2 young women standing near the champagne tower whispering quietly to each other. Vanessa said she wanted the photos to feel younger and cleaner, one of them said. Apparently too many older relatives ruined the aesthetic. The other woman laughed softly before taking another sip of champagne. I stared down at my untouched dinner plate while heat crawled slowly up my neck. Younger and cleaner. Such a strange way to describe family. A few minutes later, Olivia walked past my table holding the edge of her wedding gown carefully above the carpet. She looked breathtaking under the amber lights. For a second I thought she might stop beside me. Maybe hug me. Maybe thank me for everything. Instead, Vanessa touched her elbow gently and guided her toward another group of guests before she could even look in my direction. It was subtle, almost graceful. But I saw it clearly. Vanessa had perfected the art of exclusion in ways that left no fingerprints behind. No arguments. No scenes. Just quiet little erasures that accumulated over time, until someone disappeared from the picture completely. I sat there listening to silverware clink against china, while the band shifted into a slow jazz song near the dance floor. Nobody from my family came over. Not Daniel. Not Olivia. Not even distant cousins who used to spend summers swimming in my backyard pool years ago. The longer the evening continued, the more invisible I became. Then, just as I reached for my water glass, a woman in a black bartender uniform paused beside my chair holding a folded linen napkin in one hand. She looked to be around my age with soft gray curls pinned neatly at the back of her neck. Her expression lingered on my table for a moment before she leaned slightly closer and said very quietly, "You deserve better than this seat." Then she walked away before I could answer, disappearing through the kitchen doors that kept opening and closing behind me all night long. For the next 20 minutes, I could not stop thinking about what the bartender had said to me. You deserve better than this seat. Such a simple sentence, yet it settled into my chest with uncomfortable weight because it confirmed something I had been trying very hard not to believe all evening. I watched the woman move calmly behind the bar near the ballroom entrance, polishing glasses beneath the soft amber lighting while guests drifted around her laughing and sipping cocktails. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who noticed more than people realized. Eventually, during the speeches, she passed near my table again carrying a tray of champagne flutes. This time she slowed slightly beside me. "My name is Eleanor," she said gently. "I have worked weddings in this hotel for almost 12 years. I offered a polite smile. "Margaret." She nodded once as if she already knew exactly who I was. Then her eyes flicked briefly toward table 1 where Vanessa sat beside Olivia beneath a canopy of white roses in candlelight. "I probably should not say this," Eleanor murmured quietly, "but the original seating chart had your name at the family table." My fingers tightened slightly around the stem of my water glass. "Original seating chart?" Eleanor gave the smallest nod. "I overheard an argument this afternoon between your daughter-in-law and the wedding planner. Vanessa insisted on changing several tables at the last minute. For a moment the ballroom noise seemed distant, muffled beneath the sound of my own heartbeat. I kept my expression calm, though something cold and heavy settled deeper inside me. Did she say why? Eleanor hesitated before answering carefully. She said the photographs needed balance. Her exact words were that older relatives can change the visual energy of formal pictures. I stared across the ballroom at Vanessa while Eleanor quietly moved away again into the crowd. Change the visual energy. It was such a polished way to say something cruel. The band began another song while guests applauded after Daniel finished his father of the bride's speech. He talked about Olivia's kindness, her generosity, the strength of family traditions. Listening to him felt almost surreal. I remembered the little boy who used to crawl into bed beside Walter and me during thunderstorms because he was afraid of loud noises. The same boy who once cried for an entire afternoon after accidentally breaking one of my crystal vases when he was 9 years old. Daniel had once been tender-hearted. Somewhere between promotions, expensive neighborhoods, and Vanessa's carefully managed social world, that softness had disappeared. Or maybe he had simply learned to hide it better. As dessert was served, photographers moved from table to table taking candid family pictures. Every time they approached nearby tables, guests leaned closer together smiling warmly beneath the candlelight. But nobody came near table 46. It was as though my little corner beside the kitchen had become invisible territory everyone unconsciously avoided. I watched Olivia laughing with her bridesmaids while flashes from cameras reflected across the ballroom mirrors. Then suddenly one of the photographers lifted his camera toward me from across the room. Before he could take the picture, Vanessa stepped directly into his path and whispered something in his ear. He lowered the camera immediately and turned away. That moment hurt more than the table placement itself. Not because I needed another photograph but because it showed intention. Deliberate erasure. I sat perfectly still while the kitchen door swung open behind me again, releasing another burst of heat and noise into the ballroom. And for the first time all evening, I stopped wondering whether Vanessa disliked me. The truth was much colder than that. She was embarrassed by me. By the time the cake cutting began, The ballroom had grown louder and warmer with wine, music, and polished laughter. Guests crowded near the dance floor holding up phones while Olivia and her new husband smiled beneath the towering white cake I had personally chosen from a bakery in Boston 6 months earlier. Vanilla bean with raspberry filling. Olivia's favorite since childhood. I remember driving through freezing rain that December morning just to attend the tasting with her because Vanessa claimed she had a charity brunch she could not miss. At the time I believed I was helping create memories. Sitting there now beside the kitchen doors, I realized I had mostly been convenient. A waiter stopped beside my table and quietly replaced my untouched coffee with a fresh cup before disappearing again into the crowd. The smell of dark roast drifted upward with the steam while I watched guests surround Olivia for photographs and congratulations. Nobody seemed to notice I had barely moved all evening. Then, through the shifting crowd near the ballroom entrance, I saw a familiar face I had not expected to see. Harold Bennett, my late husband's attorney. He stood near the coat check counter adjusting the sleeve of his navy overcoat while scanning the room as though searching for someone specific. Harold had handled Walter's estate nearly 7 years ago after the heart attack that changed everything about my life in a single afternoon. He was older now, thinner around the face, but still carried the same calm expression that had comforted me during those awful months of paperwork and probate hearings. When his eyes finally found mine at table 46, something subtle changed in his expression. Not surprise, recognition, concern. A few minutes later he approached quietly while guests remained focused on the dance floor. "Margaret," he said warmly, placing one hand lightly against the back of my chair. "I almost did not see you over here." I smiled faintly. Apparently I blend into the wallpaper these days. His eyes drifted toward the kitchen doors swinging open behind me. "This seems like an unusual place for the grandmother of the bride." I shrugged gently. "Vanessa prefers symmetry." Harold looked at me for a long moment before lowering his voice. "I was actually planning to call you next week. There is something regarding Walter's family trust that should probably be reviewed soon." The words immediately sharpened my attention. Walter had always handled finances carefully. Investments, property taxes, college, accounts. He believed money should protect family, not control it. After his death, I rarely touched anything beyond what was necessary. "Reviewed?" I asked quietly. Harold nodded once. "There are conditions attached to certain distributions that become active after major family events. Marriage is one of them." Before I could ask anything further, Daniel suddenly appeared beside us holding a champagne glass. "Harold," he said with forced cheerfulness, "I did not know you were coming tonight." Harold's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Your mother invited me months ago." Daniel glanced briefly at my table at the kitchen doors, at the untouched dessert plate in front of me. For just 1 second, guilt flickered across his face before disappearing again beneath polite exhaustion. "Mom," he said carefully, "are you doing okay over here?" "Over here. Not with us. Not at the family table. Over here beside the servers and dish carts." I looked directly at my son and realized something painful. He knew exactly what Vanessa had done. And worse than that, he had allowed it because confronting her would have been inconvenient. I folded my napkin carefully onto the table and gave him the same calm smile I had worn all evening. "I am fine, Daniel," I said softly. "I finally understand where I belong." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of candlelight and carefully rehearsed happiness. Guests danced beneath the chandeliers while waiters cleared dessert plates and folded abandoned linen napkins with mechanical precision. Somewhere near the center of the ballroom, Olivia laughed during a slow dance with her husband, while photographers circled around them capturing what would later become framed memories on expensive walls. I remained at table 46 listening to the steady rhythm of kitchen doors opening and closing behind me. Around 10:30, people slowly began gathering coats and saying emotional goodbyes near the hotel entrance. Vanessa floated through the crowd thanking guests with graceful efficiency, touching elbows lightly, smiling for photographs, kissing cheeks in the polished way women like her always seemed to master effortlessly. When she finally approached my table, her perfume reached me before her words did. "White gardenia. Sharp and expensive." "Margaret," she said warmly, though her eyes never softened, "I hope you enjoyed the evening." "Enjoyed," Such a strange word for humiliation carefully wrapped in silk ribbon. I looked up at her calmly. It was unforgettable. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across her face as though she could not tell whether I meant that as gratitude or warning. Then her practiced smile returned immediately. Olivia looked beautiful tonight, did she not? She did, I answered softly. Walter would have been proud of her. Vanessa nodded politely but said nothing about Walter after that. She never liked conversations that reminded people where the family money originally came from. Before leaving, she placed one perfectly manicured hand against the back of my chair and leaned slightly closer. The honeymoon flight leaves at 7 tomorrow morning, she said casually. Olivia is so excited about Tuscany. Everything turned out perfectly. Then she walked away before I could answer, her satin heels disappearing into the crowd of guests near the ballroom exit. I sat there for another few minutes after she left, staring at the half-melted candle centerpiece in front of me while the ballroom slowly emptied. The flowers smelled overly sweet now, almost suffocating after hours beneath the heat of stage lights. Somewhere nearby, hotel staff began stacking chairs for cleanup. Harold Bennett approached quietly again once most guests had gone. You should not drive home this late, he said gently. Did you reserve a room upstairs? I nodded. Just for tonight. He hesitated before handing me a small cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in Walter's handwriting. Even after 7 years, seeing those familiar letters still tightened something inside my chest. What is this? I whispered. Harold glanced toward the nearly empty ballroom before answering carefully. Walter updated part of the family trust 6 months before he passed away. He was worried about certain patterns developing inside the family. My fingers trembled slightly against the envelope. What kind of patterns? Harold's expression remained calm but serious. Disrespect tied to financial dependence. He wanted protections in place if generosity ever stopped being appreciated. I stared at the envelope without opening it. The weight of it felt strangely heavy despite the thin paper. Across the ballroom, Vanessa stood near the exit laughing beside Olivia, while hotel staff loaded wedding gifts onto brass luggage carts. She looked radiant beneath the chandelier lights, completely certain she had controlled every detail of the evening. And perhaps until tonight she had. Slowly, I slipped the envelope into my purse and stood from table 46 for the final time. The chair scraped softly across the carpet beside the kitchen doors. Nobody looked over. Nobody noticed me leave. But for the first time all evening, I no longer felt invisible. I felt awake. My hotel room overlooked the Connecticut River, though at nearly midnight the water was nothing more than a dark ribbon beneath the city lights. I slipped off my heels slowly and sat on the edge of the bed for several minutes without turning on the television or even removing my jewelry. The silence felt unfamiliar after hours inside that ballroom. No music. No clinking glasses. No forced laughter. Just the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint sound of traffic somewhere below the window. Walter's envelope rested on the nightstand beside me. Cream-colored. Slightly worn at the edges. My name written in the same steady handwriting that had once filled grocery lists, anniversary cards, and little notes left beside the coffee maker on Sunday mornings. For a long time I simply stared at it. Then finally, with trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a letter folded neatly beside several legal documents stamped with the Whitmore Family Trust seal. I recognized Harold's handwriting on some of the notes clipped to the paperwork. But it was Walter's letter that held my attention first. Margaret, if you are reading this, then something inside the family has changed in ways I hoped would never happen. You have always led with your heart, and I have always admired that about you. But love without boundaries can become permission for people to forget your worth. I had to stop reading for a moment because my eyes blurred unexpectedly. Walter had known me too well. Even after 41 years of marriage, he somehow understood parts of me I barely understood myself. I wiped my eyes carefully and continued reading. The trust contains a conduct clause tied to discretionary family distributions. If any beneficiary knowingly humiliates, isolates, or manipulates another direct family member for financial gain, access to future discretionary funds may be suspended pending trustee review. Harold will explain the details if necessary. I stared at the sentence for several seconds while the room remained perfectly still around me. Suspended. Future discretionary funds. Slowly, I reached for the legal documents beneath the letter and began reading more carefully. Walter had established educational accounts, property protections, and long-term inheritance allocations years before his death. Most of the family wealth technically remained inside the trust itself, not directly under Daniel's control the way Vanessa clearly believed. More importantly, the Tuscany honeymoon villa, the one Vanessa had proudly mentioned before leaving the ballroom, was still attached to a discretionary travel account requiring trustee authorization for final release of funds after the wedding ceremony concluded. Trustee authorization. Mine. I leaned back slowly against the headboard while the realization settled heavily into the room around me. Downstairs somewhere inside the hotel, Olivia and her husband were probably asleep after their reception, dreaming about private vineyards, luxury suites, and candlelit dinners beneath the Italian countryside sky. Vanessa likely believed the evening had ended exactly the way she intended. Elegant photographs, perfect guests, carefully managed appearances, and me quietly humiliated beside the kitchen doors where I supposedly belonged. My phone buzzed softly against the nightstand then. A text message from Olivia. "Thank you again for everything tonight, Grandma. We are heading to the airport at 5 in the morning. Love you." I read the message twice. Not once did she mention the table. Not once did she ask whether I had been hurt. Perhaps she truly had not noticed. Or perhaps pretending not to notice had simply become easier over the years. I placed the phone down carefully and looked once more at Walter's letter resting open across my lap. Love without boundaries can become permission. Outside the hotel window, rain had started falling softly against the glass. And for the first time since Walter died, I finally understood that protecting your dignity was not cruelty. Sometimes it was survival. I did not sleep that night. Around 4:30 in the morning, I made myself coffee using the little machine beside the hotel dresser, and sat alone by the window watching rain slide slowly down the glass. The city below still looked half asleep beneath the pale blue light before sunrise. Somewhere across town, Olivia and her husband were probably loading suitcases into a black car bound for the airport, while Vanessa supervised everything with her usual perfection. I imagined her checking passports, confirming flight times, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her tailored cream coat. For years she had mistaken control for elegance. My phone rested quietly beside Walter's letter on the small table near the window. At exactly 5 o'clock, it began vibrating. Olivia's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Grandma." Her voice sounded strained and confused. Behind her I could hear airport announcements echoing faintly through a terminal speaker. "Olivia," I said calmly. "Is everything all right?" Silence lingered for half a second too long. "There is some kind of problem with the honeymoon reservation," she said carefully. "The airline said our travel authorization was frozen, and the villa booking in Tuscany was cancelled last night. Vanessa thinks there must have been a mistake with the payment account." I looked out at the rain sliding down the hotel window while she spoke. "I see." Another pause followed. "Did you know anything about this?" she asked quietly. Her voice was softer now. Nervous. Not angry yet. Just uncertain. I wrapped both hands around the warm coffee cup before answering. "The travel account belongs to the Whitmore Family Trust, Olivia. Your grandfather structured it very specifically." I heard muffled voices in the background. Then Vanessa's sharper tone somewhere farther away asking if she was speaking to me. "Grandma," Olivia whispered quickly, "can you please fix this? We are supposed to board in 40 minutes. The desperation in her voice pulled painfully against my chest because despite everything, I still loved her deeply. But love and self-respect could no longer live separately inside me. "Before I decide anything," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something honestly." The terminal noise hummed faintly through the phone line. "Did you know where I was seated last night?" Silence. Long enough to become its own answer. "Olivia," I repeated gently. She finally exhaled. "Vanessa handled the seating chart," she admitted. "She said it would look more balanced for the photos." Balanced. The same polished language. The same careful cruelty disguised as aesthetics. I closed my eyes briefly. "And you agreed?" Another silence. Then quietly, almost too softly to hear, she answered, "I did not want drama at the wedding. For a moment neither of us spoke. Rain tapped steadily against the glass beside me while somewhere through the phone an airline employee announced final boarding for another flight entirely. Do you know what hurt the most? I asked finally. It was not the table beside the kitchen. It was realizing how easy it had become for all of you to let me disappear. Olivia began crying softly then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet little breaths breaking apart inside an airport terminal thousands of miles away from Tuscany and candlelit villas, and the perfect honeymoon Vanessa had spent months describing to everyone. I listened without interrupting. Then very calmly, I gave her Harold Bennett's phone number. When you are ready to understand what your grandfather tried to protect, I said gently, call him. And before Vanessa could grab the phone, I ended the conversation. 3 days later, the rain had finally cleared from Connecticut. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors of my house in long golden strips while I stood in the kitchen arranging fresh hydrangeas into the crystal vase Walter bought me for our 30th anniversary. The quiet felt different now. Not lonely. Peaceful. For the first time in years, nobody was asking me for money, favors, or emotional rescue disguised as family obligation. The calls had started almost immediately after the honeymoon collapse. First Daniel, then Vanessa, then Olivia again. I answered none of them. Harold handled everything professionally through the trust office downtown, while I remained exactly where I wanted to be. Home. By Friday afternoon, a black SUV pulled slowly into my driveway. I watched through the front window as Olivia stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. Daniel followed behind her looking exhausted, his shoulders heavier than I had ever seen them before. Vanessa remained inside the vehicle gripping her phone tightly without coming to the door. That alone told me more than words ever could. Olivia knocked softly while Daniel stared down at the porch steps in silence. When I opened the door, neither of them spoke immediately. They simply looked older somehow. Smaller. The kind of exhaustion that comes from finally seeing something clearly after years of refusing to look at it. Grandma, Olivia whispered first, her voice rough from crying. I stepped aside quietly and let them enter. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish and coffee. Familiar. Safe. Daniel paused near the hallway table where Walter's photograph still stood beside the brass lamp. For several seconds he stared at the picture without saying anything. Then finally he spoke. I failed you. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard because excuses would have been easier. Vanessa would have preferred excuses. Stress. Miscommunication. Wedding pressure. But Daniel looked directly at me for the first time in years, and I realized shame had finally broken through whatever comfort silence once gave him. Olivia removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing swollen eyes beneath smeared mascara. I did not think it was that serious, she admitted quietly. I knew the seating was wrong, but I told myself it was only one night. One night. Funny how disrespect always sounds smaller to the people not sitting beside the kitchen doors. I gestured toward the living room and we sat together beneath the tall windows overlooking the backyard garden Walter planted before he died. Nobody touched the coffee I served. The silence between us felt honest now instead of polite. Your grandfather created those trust conditions because he feared something exactly like this, I said calmly. Not because of money. Because money reveals character when people stop feeling grateful for it. Olivia lowered her eyes into her lap. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face slowly. Vanessa thinks you wanted revenge, he admitted after a while. I looked toward the hydrangeas resting on the dining table, pale blue against the afternoon light. No, iyan suarat sufli. If I wanted revenge, I would have embarrassed all of you publicly at the wedding. Daniel flinched slightly because he knew I was right. I could have stood in that ballroom and exposed everything. The trust. The money. The humiliation. Instead I left quietly, the same way dignity usually leaves a room after being ignored too long. Olivia's voice trembled when she finally asked the question both of them came to hear. Will you ever forgive us? I looked at my granddaughter carefully then. Really looked at her. Beneath the expensive clothes and polished wedding photographs, she still carried traces of the little girl who once ate strawberry ice cream beside me on a windy Cape Cod afternoon. Forgiveness is possible, I said gently. But trust is earned slowly after it is broken. Outside the window, sunlight moved softly across Walter's garden, while the black SUV remained parked silently in the driveway. And for the first time in a very long while, nobody in the room treated me like I was invisible.